Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. I'm excited to be welcoming John Cook back. John, I think this is number 6, maybe?
Is it really?
I think
Wow.
so. I think you are the most attended, but you're also the most frequent guest on our webinar thus far.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And
I'll
we
sure
had
mention that later this week.
and as people drop in, we've had a gregreat turnout for today. So people are not tired of you, John. Maybe that's
Wow.
takeaway from today.
It's good to know.
All right, as everyone drops in, would love for you to drop into the chat box, those of you attending live. And of course, we have these recorded and you can visit those looking back in these sessions. But if you're attending live, would love for you to utilize that chat box to let us know who you are, where you're from. You can utilize that chat box or the Q&A at any time. The chat box to network, you can ask questions, offer additional resources. We have folks adding value in that chat box in these conversations, which is part of the reason we have people attending live each time throughout our time. So as you're dropping your name and where you're from in the chat box there, John, and before we dive in, who are you, John, and what are you currently loving about what you do? Who are you? What are you currently loving about what you do?
Well, it's great to see you again, Wes, and thank you all who are on the call. Glad you're with us. I am, as you know, Wes, an executive coach. I am first a father of 4, secondly, an extremely avid fly fisherman, and thirdly, an executive coach. And what I love about this work, I continue to love, are the relationships that we get to build with senior leaders like many of you on the call. Some of those can become, extremely rewarding and gives us an opportunity to make an impact. The other thing that I really love more these days is the opportunity to help other coaches get better. And that's a different thing more recently within the past 2 to 3 years. Then that's also extremely rewarding.
Yep. It has been amazing with these webinars, along with some of our other just complementary thought leadership resources that are out there. We'll dive into our topic in just a second. But it's been amazing to me. I've been chatting with folks, and I had somebody just the other day say, just the complementary things that the partners and coaches are talking about and putting out there in the thought leadership space from Admired Leadership are better than anything I've ever paid for, which I thought was fascinating. So, and if you're not, so today
Yeah.
we sent out ahead of time. We're going to be talking about talent, of course, but we sent out a field note. So these are for the past 2.5 or 3 years, daily little nuggets of leadership wisdom that come out every single day. We sent out ahead of time a field note called High Potential for what exactly? If you're not a Field Note subscriber, would love for you to do that. Sophie has just dropped that Field Note in the chat box for you. So if you didn't get that ahead of time, that's going to be kind of the springboard we jump into there. Before we dive in too deeply, though, I'm going to do a little bit of a throwback. So very recently, we had Brian Downey, one of our other executive coaches, on as a guest around the topic of when and how should a leader delegate decisions. And one of the overarching things he said about that was there's a couple things that leaders should never delegate, and that is strategy and assessing talent. Now, when we say delegate, we mean hand over to somebody else completely. And a couple things came out of that were strategy and talent. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen you and some of our other coaches coach new leaders when they come into a new team or a new organization, basically say to them, one thing you need to do is assess talent.
Well, in fact, Wes, we would say, there's a big urge to go right after the strategy.
That's right.
But first things first, you should assess talent, then think about the strategy.
Yeah. So Sophie also just dropped that particular recording, which is a great one. Thank you, Sophie, for that, Brian Downey. But I wanted to kind of throw that back a little bit because we talked about strategy and talent in that vein, kind of on the same level. But in this, I wanted to frame it up because I've heard you express that before, John. Talent, in a lot of ways, figuring out where the talent is unbelievably important. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could say that hiring and managing talent is one of the most strategic and symbolic acts you can do as a leader.
Yeah.
And in fact, the decisions that we make around talent in terms of what we communicate, who we promote, who we hire, who we fire, those decisions speak tremendously loud.
Yes, that's exactly so. Some symbolic approaches to that too, and we've actually got some of that coming out in a new module. Those of you who are subscribers to our content online, we've got a new module coming out around communication and symbolism and things. It's going to be pretty exciting that we're pumped for. All right, so in the piece of the field note, John, we explore how the term high potential has become almost saturated, maybe even a little meaningless at times. My good friend Kit, already in the chat box, has asked the question, what's the difference between talent and potential across the board?
Ah,
Could you
okay.
expand on this idea a little bit right off the bat? And what's the problem with how most organizations maybe think about high potential?
Well, if you'll allow me to speak about my clients and those organizations, I'm a little reluctant to talk about most organizations, but what I do see is for all the right reasons, organizations tend to be quite inclusive around building a high potential cohort, and
Hmm.
it makes sense, right?
Hmm.
We want to
Hmm.
include as many high potential leaders as possible. But of course, that can have the effect of diluting a program. It could have the effect of diluting an experience for certain folks. One thing we know for sure about these high potential type programs is that people really appreciate being with their peers. They want to
Hmm.
look around the room and feel like they're sitting with a true peer set.
Yep.
And when you look around the room and that's not quite so, that can be disruptive. The other thing, as the article points out, is most of our clients really have a hard time defining what exactly potential is,
That's right. That's right.
and so how do you know how to look for it if you haven't really quite defined it?
Yeah.
And to the question we've already gotten around talent and potential, we'll dig into that. But what Wes and I hope all of you take away today is a couple of ways to think about some indicators
Hmm.
of talent, some indicators of true longer term potential.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking about that in a broader sense, because as the article says, um, this is largely about let's be specific. Potential for what? But
Yeah.
my takeaway from the article is high potential does not necessarily equal ready to lead,
Okay. Let's
right? So
let's just stop right there because
okay,
that's a gigantic takeaway, right? Say that one more time and maybe dig even a little deeper because
yeah, let me
I
give you an
think
example. I mean, the
yeah,
example we see all the time. So high potential does not necessarily equal ready to lead or even fit to lead for
yeah,
that matter.
yeah.
So the easy example, maybe I'm sure many of you have some familiarity with this, is we typically promote the great salesperson to become the manager of sales. Well, guess what? Just because they're great at sales doesn't mean that they're great at managing people.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's true across every industry. The skills that I have shown that are making me excel and knocking performance out of the park are not necessarily the same skills or leadership set that I need to lead a team of people who do
Yeah.
that.
And it's not always like simple and black and white either. I mean, we spend an awful lot of time inside of financial services. Financial services is known for, or probably has more than the typical industry, known for something called co-heads.
Hmm.
Why do we have co-heads? Well, number one, we want to retain superstar talent. We want to promote them. We want to get them into spots. So instead of picking one, we'll have two.
Yep. How does, let's talk a little bit, and I'm already off of our agenda a little bit here, but let's talk a little bit about where you've seen or where our firm has seen high potential cohorts work really, really well, or programs that I identify and help high potential people, right? However you're defining that, or talent versus organizations that we've seen where that is a maybe more of a bit of a miss.
Yeah.
What are the dynamics that you could think of there? And I know I didn't give you that question ahead of time.
No, that I think the answer there is relatively simple. I mean, let's face it, so HR's job or human capital's job is to help facilitate quality conversations around talent. Some
Mhm.
organizations do that really well, some organizations not so much. But those who do it well then have inputs into a selection process that says this is going to be our cohort.
Yep.
And 9 times out of 10, less is more. A
Yeah.
smaller group is more, it makes it more special. Again, it makes it more peer like. And that's where we see, broadly speaking, that's where we see more success.
So tell me if I would be correct in saying this statement. There's lots of different ways to define high potential. We might say there are certain indicators for talent
Yes,
that are tried and
yes,
true. Okay.
yes. Um, Let me, before we go there, Wes, let me just tee up a couple of principles. One we've
I love the way you operate,
one
John.
we've one we've already said, which is, hiring and managing talent is a strategic act, and the decisions we make around that are critical. Why? Because talent is a strategy for arming the organization for what you need next.
Mm,
It's a strategy for arming the organization for that next phase of growth, or whatever you need to perform at the next level. So that's number one. Number two, and I think this starts to answer the question of, what's the difference between talent and potential. Talent is not necessarily skillfulness.
hmm,
Talent is more universal. What do I mean by that? I mean that true talent finds a way to win in good times and bad, high tide, low tide. They tend to operate well in different contexts and even different organizations.
mhm,
The third one is that talent does not necessarily equal cultural add or cultural fit. We
ooh,
know lots of
but
firms.
we
Yeah,
certainly equate those things a lot of the time, right? We
exactly.
say
And it's human nature. We want to hire people that are like us, but we
that's
all know that's not the right thing in the long run.
right.
So we need to be deliberate about that and be screening people for, of course, background and track record,
Mhm.
um, and then maybe get into what is their potential. Do we see indicators, which we'll talk about next, before we apply any sort of cultural screen?
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
That's an important distinction in the process of recruiting, frankly.
Yep. Okay. So I'm
Um,
going to be just transparent with all our listeners, which we have hundreds of people all over the world that are listening to these recordings across the board. You may see me doing a little bit of a dance here as I interview John. Very recently, we had one of our on-location events in Philadelphia where John and some of our other coaches dug into the indicators of talent. And you hear John say that. I want to take just a bit of a step back because, John, I want you to articulate how clear and concise those indicators are. Maybe just give a little teaser of those. But I
sure.
also want
Yeah,
to be really transparent that we have spent 30 years studying the world's most admired leaders, coming out with good practices that drive performance and followership, and we have that accessible to folks. It's there's an online content, and we coach to that as well. In the same way, we have a talent team within our firm that coaches and advises towards these 9 indicators that we have discovered. So in the recording on the call today, it would be fantastic if we could give you all 9 of those indicators and dig into that. But of course, those are pieces that we reserve for our client base in a lot of ways. So as you kind of give a high level overview of that for us, John, I'm going to ask Sophie to drop in the chat box. Again, we oftentimes allow people to give 10-minute conversations with our coaches. So we're going to do that today. If you want to sign up for one of those 10-minute conversations, give us a little bit of context about your specific situation. We'd be happy to dive in just a little bit deeper with you on those particular calls, just to talk a little bit more. But in a recording setting here, where if you see us do a little bit of dance. But with all that, with that context and that frame, John, kind of articulate as best we can or give everybody a little glimpse of the power of the indicators of talent.
Yeah, for sure. And essentially, what Wes is saying is we think there's 9 of them. Is it a perfect list? I don't know. Is it a pretty comprehensive list? I think so. I recently did sort of poke some holes at it, and there might be one thing missing around kind of cognitive flexibility or the ability to pivot, particularly when it comes to strategy. But we don't need to get into that. I do think that this talent thing is hard. We have to call it what it is. When you think about talent and hiring in particular, it's kind of like dating in some ways. Both sides are a little bit in the dark. And it's been said that the person that we marry is someone about whom we have a magnificent hunch. Well, the people that we hire, presumably we have a hunch too, but it doesn't always work out. So I just want to acknowledge that nobody has cracked the code completely on this, but we're gonna help you get a little bit closer. We're gonna help you be a little bit more precise.
That's right. Yep.
And so I think it's important to say that up front. So as I said, we think there are indicators of talent, and we tend to put way too much emphasis on background, track record, experience. Why? Because we don't know exactly if it was the platform that person was on, if it was the team that person was around,
right.
If it would just happen to be a great market. We don't know exactly where that success came from. Yeah. So knowing that, of course, we need to do a screen for experience, skills, et cetera. That's important, but we can't overweight it. Yeah. Instead, I think we should look at some of these indicators. And like I said, we think there's about 9, and some of them are really obvious when you hear them. As a set together of 9, they are proprietary to us. So here's the first one that I really, really like. And
by the way, as you tee that up, you're speaking to every HR people leader, chief people officer that are out there right now that ever looked at somebody's LinkedIn and saw that they have immense experience and have knocked things out of the park. And then when they get up to the interview and you ask them how they did that, how they went about that, what did they actually do, you realize, oh, you really did none of this, right? You were a part, you had a dynamic team around you, whatever those things were. And so the indicators dive deep into that. The indicators are all about what this person can actually do, how they can actually think about this and those kind of things. So continue.
So ultimately it's through the power of questions, but you got to know what you're questioning. The first one is what I call excellence someplace else. Maybe you could think of it as two-sport athlete. But the simple idea here, or what we have seen in talent with a capital T, is that they know what good looks like in another domain. It doesn't matter what the domain is, Wes. You could have been you could have played violin at Juilliard. You could have been a chess champion. You could have been on a Division III national basketball team. Doesn't matter. But do you know the work ethic, the sacrifice, the commitment that goes into learning something, learning it well, and performing at a reasonably high level?
Yeah, I love
what we have learned from studying these folks is that skill of knowing what it takes to get good at one thing is transferable to get good at another thing.
Yep.
And I think that's super cool. And you don't necessarily have to You don't have to get too creative with your question set to understand whether or not someone has that in their background.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating when you look at these indicators and you think of questions that get after these indicators. You start coming up with really great questions that find out those indicators, but are also questions that end up you find so much else about them too
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
same time. Yeah,
exactly, exactly. So let's go to an example of one of those. Of course, as you might imagine, self-awareness is a critical indicator.
yeah,
We you can point to many different studies. We
yeah,
know that lack of self-awareness is one of the number one derailers for senior leaders, especially
yes.
CEOs.
Solve self-awareness for us in the last 9 minutes here for us, John.
Self-awareness. So here's a powerful question. I love this question. I use it all the time, particularly when in hiring. Um, but what I love to ask is, when's the last time someone misperceived you and why? When's the
Mhm,
last time somebody misperceived you in a positive way and why? When's the last time someone misperceived you in a negative way and why? Because
mhm,
here's what real self awareness is. Self awareness is not just, hey, I understand my weaknesses. True self awareness is understanding weaknesses, understanding flat spots, etc., which we all have, and then also knowing how that rubs off on other people.
mm. That's good. That's really good. Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left. We got a question in the box there. So here's what I love. I think we've kind of just touched on what it might look like to hire for talent. You want to look at indicators of what people actually do. Could you speak to two more things? So anything additional you might have on hiring for talent, what you might speak to in regards to nurturing talent. Can it
Mhm.
be nurtured? And then anything you can speak to on promoting or elevating talent, and how retention plays
In
into it.
how many minutes? That's like three questions in one there.
It is three questions. That's why I'm giving to you all at once, so you have plenty of time. So, hiring, nurturing, how does all that play out? You're still looking at the same nine indicators across the board. You're still looking for the
That's
same thing
right.
as far as
And
talent
that
is
is a
concerned.
critical point, Wes, because these things are not just for hiring.
That's
You
right.
can use them to assess your own team. And so, you want to look for things like um, demonstrations of emotional maturity.
Mhm.
Is there a no drama factor? You
Yeah.
want to look for things like, a level of stick to itiveness or grit.
Hmm.
There's we don't have enough time to get into all of them right now, but you can see these things in action in your own teams.
Hmm.
In terms of nurturing and developing that talent, that goes back to the things that we all know. How we think about leadership is, if you're making people or situations better, you're leading. And I
Yeah.
would argue it's all of our jobs to be constantly be constantly helping people get better by using feedback in a very productive way.
Hmm.
It's not saving things up for the mid and the annual review. It's more about continuous feedback day to day. That's point one, and we can spend a lot of time on that. Point two is, people got to know. People have to trust your intention,
Yeah.
and by that I mean they need to know that you are in their corner.
That's
They
right.
need to know that you are rooting for them, even when things might be going a bit sideways.
Yep. Yep.
And so, the more you care, the better position you are to encourage people, support them, push them, give them difficult feedback, make them better.
All right, so I'm going to tee you up with another question as I reiterate something that you said that I want to be sure all of our listeners said. But at some point, oftentimes, the leader, the people under that leader, or the people that person is leading, or the people that are being supervised by that person, the people under that leader oftentimes become more talented at the job than the leader themselves, right? And a lot of times talent leaves because they realize that. I'm more talented than the person above me. So I'd love for you to speak just for a second on what do you do when you're the leader, and for hopefully you've got some awareness and you want people to become better and better and better. How do you lead people that at the end of the day are better at the job at hand than you are yourself? So I'm gonna give you.
Well, in short, you get out of the way and you're constantly on the hunt for obstacles that you can remove to help make their work better.
Okay, so pause
It-
right there because one of the questions we had over and over and over again from people was, how do you motivate and inspire talent? How do you motivate and inspire them? And one of the ways you do that, I think you're articulating right now. One of the most powerful ways you can do that, and that is approach them and try to remove barriers for them.
yeah, well, if they're truly stars, obviously you got to provide direction and guidance, and we're going to take this hill, but then get out of the way.
Yeah,
In the meantime, you're never going to know their job as well as they know their job. You might as well admit that. The pace of change is too fast.
that's right.
But you can understand in great detail what's getting in their way, what
That's right.
obstacles are they facing, where are their biggest challenges, and attempt to remove those things.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Okay. Anything else top of mind for you? This time has gone faster than I think any webinar so far. We only have like 3 minutes left. What else is top of mind for you, John,
Well,
as it
do we have
relates
any
to
other
us?
questions that we might address in the last minute or so?
Yeah, nothing specific has come up in the chat box or the Q&A since we've been there, but we've got plenty that came in ahead of time. What does it look like to scale talent development for organizations? What are the organizations that are scaling that well? That may be a great question to speak to in our last minutes.
What does it look like to scale talent
Yeah,
development?
scale talent
Oof.
development.
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to a client that does this exact same thing for a very large financial services organization yesterday. I mean, I think the most important thing is to get absolute clarity on not just the what, but the how. And we're
Mm,
seeing this more and more that, of course, performance is mandatory, but how we get there, the
yeah,
leadership and management behaviors that are expected and that will be measured in addition to your contribution, in addition to your performance, ironing that out, as simple as it sounds, many organizations still struggle with. But
yeah.
once you have that, then you can build all kinds of development programs off of those management behaviors, those leadership behaviors, and begin to cascade it across the entire org.
Yeah, that's good. I'd love for everyone who's listening to the recording or everyone who's, obviously on live, think about honestly, and it may be subconsciously, you may have a program for it, you may have a checkbox for it of some sort or an assessment tool of some sort. How are you assessing talent or potential within your organization right now? And is that assessment truly aligned to what really drives performance within your organization? And that's where a lot of times rubber hits the road, right? We have a high potential development, program, rising stars, whatever it might be called, and we have it because it sounds good rather
Mm.
than have it because we're really looking at where is the talent within our organization, and how do we lift that up and drive that.
Yeah.
um, one more time, Sophie, if you could drop in the chat box one more time, the just the 10-minute bookings that people can do with a coach. There are obviously a lot more to dig into here. I'm already realizing, John, that we should probably have an hour set aside uh,
Yeah.
for
Easy.
for this in particular, but certainly would love to connect out with you further. If you want to go back and listen to some of the recordings of some of the previous sessions, you can do that as well. So if you'll drop those links in the chat box too. Um, John, any final encouragement that you might give to leaders on the call who know deep? We have so many leaders who say, "Yes, I know talent is the most important, what is the thing that I should keep top of mind when I'm looking
If
for
talent is the
talent?
most important thing, then we need to make time for it.
That's right.
I mean, we don't need to over-engineer this, but at least at every quarterly, or at least 3 times a year, are we setting time aside to have talent conversations?
Yeah. If we believe talent is what drives us forward and sets us up for the next stage of our organization or our team, why are we only assessing or looking at or developing talent once a year during work performance reviews?
Yeah.
Right? Are we truly making the time and the margin and the rhythm and culture of our organization to look at and really get serious about
Yeah, in
talent?
short, it needs to be a
Powerful.
standing agenda item.
Ah, that's good. Let's end right there. That's solid. Talent assessment, nurturing, hiring for, retaining needs to be a standing agenda item. I love that. John, as always, thank you for your time. Thanks for everyone who joined us live. For those of you
Thank you,
listening
Wes.
to the recording, we look forward to connecting out with you. Everybody have a fantastic rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, or perhaps you're listening as you're drifting off to sleep, the recording. Have a great day, everybody. Cheers.
Take care.